Hey folks. So before we continue with Phaser, I wanted to go with you a couple things that we had saw there that we're gonna have to deal with. And chief among them are functions. We have to understand how they work, how we write them, and what is happening specifically when we get to creating our objects. And we're going to see the word this a lot. And I'm going to try to explain why we write this. So that has to do more with objects, which we'll go over as well too. So we're going to take a quick intermission from the actual game building just to explain these concepts because they're pretty fundamental to understanding how to write this going forward. Okay. So the first thing we'll start with is our functions. And we saw this when we built our initial phaser experience by doing function preload, right? Looks something like this. And function create, right? So we have these functions, right? This word function, and then a word after it, and then followed by parentheses. What is all this? Why are we writing this? All right. So I'm gonna try to help you develop a deeper understanding of what's happening behind the scenes because functions are fundamental to programming. You're going to see it as part of any um, game engine language. So Unity has them. Unreal has them. Um, every game engine has them. So what are they? So a function in the briefest explanation are going to be um, reusable blocks of code. So there's an idea in coding that you don't want to write your code more than once, right? You don't want to have to repeat yourself. And so with functions, what we can do is we can create something that is not necessarily like a loop that repeats itself, but just a miniaturized block of code that we can use wherever we need to. So let's go through a couple examples, all right? And I might start with, let's see, we'll start with a simple function. And I'm going to get rid of these ones. And we'll keep it to the theme of game design, right? So actually, yeah, we'll keep it those. We'll keep those right now. Okay. So function preload, function create. At the end of this, what we do is we hit a pair of curly braces, open and closing. And anything that we put inside these curly braces are going to technically fall within the function preload. Okay. And so I might just do something simple. I might do a console.log. Okay. And what that's going to do is it's going to log to the console over here, what we got. And I'm going to console log a statement. I'm going to say I have been preloaded. Okay. We'll get rid of function create just for now. Okay. So we have a function preload. This comes built into Phaser. Click run, and nothing happens. Okay. So we gave it a command, and it didn't seem to do it. And the reason is that what we've just done on line one is we've defined a function. We've told the computer that we're going to be running a little segment of code called preload, and we're going to console.log. We're going to console log that statement, right? Now with preload, we've identified this keyword preload as a function by defining using the keyword function before it. But we also have to call or invoke a function, meaning that once we define something, we then have to tell the computer to run it. Okay, so if we just write preload with open close parentheses and we click run, okay, we now see that it has console log that statement, I've been preloaded. So this right here builds your functions. This right here builds it ready to go. This right here is going to call it and tell it to run it. Now, I told you this is a repeating block of code, right? We can reusable block of code, and we can reuse it, meaning that we can do preload. We can use that word again, click run, and every time we tell it to run preload, it's going to do the execution of the statements above, right? Console log I have been preloaded. All right. So this is a pretty basic function. We can add in any functions that we want, any names that we want. Okay. We might do something like function create. And inside there, console.log, I have been created. We go up here and we click play. Nothing happens because we forgot to call it. And now we see I have been created. So we have our first function here with preload that is called there. Create. Create. If we called create one more time, we see that I have been created shows up multiple times. Okay. So I'm going to put a tag up here or a comment that just says defining functions. Call functions. All right. And we can, I'm going to move this up here. Okay, so we see that we have now defined and called functions. Now, what I like about Phaser is that with here, our function preload is going to be something that's built into the engine, so we don't have to, we have to define this, but we don't have to call it because the engine already knows that it should be looking for a function preload and a function create, and it will load up those, okay? So there's some functions we're going to have to call and some functions that are just going to be pre-built for us. Most game engines have that. They have a basically a setup or a load phase, a create phase where they basically load all the assets once, and then they have a loop phase, and we're going to see all those in Phaser as well too. Okay. Now, there is another way to write this, and we would call this, let's see, we might call this a constructor function. No, not a constructor function. I guess it would be, it would be an anonymous function. Anonymous. Hopefully I spelled that right. Okay, anonymous function. And what that means is that we've seen functions that have the keyword function written before it. We'll see that in some cases we have just the word function. And console log. I don't have a name. Let's see. Function state requires a name. Oh, you're gonna be tricky, huh? Okay. Well, in any case, for a short example, we should be able to see a function. So these would be anonymous functions, and sometimes you'll see these at the end of like event listeners, right? Sometimes if you listen for keystroke events, you'll just see the word function with no name after it. That's because this function is going to be specific to a specific instance, and it will not be used again. So the programmer, when they write these, means it as just like a temporary one-time use function, not to be used later on. So it's going to become plain. So we're going to comment that out with just control /. But another way to write an anonymous function would be something like var hello equals function console.log hello. Oh, we forgot to call hello. Okay. So then we see hello coming up. And in this case, this is technically an anonymous function here, but we've defined it to the variable hello, and console basically set the code to repeat as the hello statement. So var hello functions console log. Okay. So there we see where we can define it just a slightly different way. It's going to look slightly different, but it's the same thing as this above. I'm just telling you this because these are the type of things we're going to see in Phaser. And so I want you to be comfortable with knowing, even if you're not 100% comfortable writing functions on your own just yet. I mean, you just started out for a lot of you. I want you to at least know what they are when you see them. Okay, we can move on. The next part is function parameters. So for this one, what we'll do is actually I'll go back to the original way of writing it. I think it's clearer this way for beginners, so we're just going to keep it this way while we're practicing, and then when this comes up in Phaser, I will point it out to you. It's just a normal function. Okay, so function parameters. We're going to create a function that is called, say this. Okay, and we'll console.log I'm saying something. All right, now to get rid of all these other preload statements, I'm going to go up here and comment all these out. Comment that out. Okay, so now, once we call say this, we see that it's saying something. So that's great and all. And maybe we want to develop a program that's going to set some text somewhere on the screen or set something to be a bit of text, and we don't have to repeat ourselves. So how do we get around that? What we can do is, I'll do another version of this. This out. Actually, I'll copy it, then I'll comment it. Okay, and for this function, say this, I'm going to add something inside these parentheses here. I'm going to add a parameter, we'll call it. All right, and this one is going to be, we'll just call it text. Okay, we will take this out of here, and I'm going to write text here. All right, what happened here? Actually, if we hover over it, it'll tell us parameter text. What this is function say this and text. And we're going to console log that text. So what this becomes is a placeholder. It becomes a variable that we don't have to define with var, let, or const. And we see that it's going to be used here. So click run. And we see that it's undefined, meaning that inside here, when we wrote say this on line 41, we now need to put something into these parentheses here to fill in that text here so it gets filled in down there. So in that case, I'm going to put in here the text that we had. I am saying something. And now we see we run it, and it works. So what is happening here? This, when we call say this, we are giving it this information to that, then gets passed into here, this text, which then gets passed into here, and then it gets logged to the console here. Okay. So what we've now done is made this pretty flexible. We made it so that we can basically we can do it again. We can just say this. I am saying something else. Okay, so we see them say something, and now it says something else. It's console log both. We've now just made this flexible. That it can possibly have different text that comes in here and have it say anything it wants. Say this. Goodbye. All right. So now we've just made a reusable bit of code. That's a very simple bit of code there, but we've made it reusable, and we can use it multiple times. We can actually add multiple parameters. And in that case, what we'll do is we'll say function say two things. And we'll say text and name. Console.log. Move this down. Console.log. We'll combine the two strings. We'll do text plus name. And that will combine the two once it's created. Say two things. And now we get to pass in two things. So the first one is text. And I'll do hello. And then to fill in name, right, which is the second parameter there. Hello, and we'll do MJ. Add a little space there. A little exclamation point there. Okay, great. And what we see is say two things has two parameters, hello and MJ, and there they are. Okay. So we can now, they've been added together. All right, so when I wrote this, hello gets the place of text because it's in the first position. Name gets the second position here and gets added to text. And so before they're console logged, they're added together to create a single phrase. Now we have multiple parameters. Okay. We'll do another one. We'll do function add and maybe x and y and console.log x plus y 2 and 3. Okay. And we see there that we can add a little arithmetic helper function here where it's going to add just the two numbers, console log those two numbers. Okay. We can do things like, let's see, divide. Do another one more function, divide x and y. These could be any names you want. It doesn't really matter. Console.log x divided by y. Got to call it. Divide 9 and 3. Okay, and we see that it gets console logged to be 3. So this is pretty handy. All right, this is very, very helpful. Let's go on to the next part, which is going to be return values. And you'll see these as well too inside Phaser. So there isn't necessarily a divide function, but you will see multiple parameters inside Phaser. Okay. And for return values, basically for function divide x and y, it would be, there we go. It would be helpful in order to not have to console log it, okay? But what happens if we want to have a function that can actually go and see what that function value is without having to console log it? Meaning that, say I want to do something with add, but I don't want to console log it. So we're actually going to do two things here, and I hope not to confuse you. We're going to say two things, or yeah, we'll use the one. Actually, we'll keep it simple. We'll use say this because we already have it built, right? So say this is just going to console log some text, okay? But here's a tricky circumstance. So we'll do say this. Okay, and inside the parentheses here, when I call it, I'm actually going to call it using divide. So we have a function that's now, as a parameter, it wants another function. Let's see what happens. Okay, we get this undefined error. Why? Because what we actually did up here is once we divided it, we console logged it. We sent it to the console for the developer, for you, okay, for the coder. What it doesn't do is it doesn't tell the rest of the program what x and y are. Okay, this has to do with something called scope inside programming. When we talk about scope, we're talking about what can see variables in other functions, or where, in the program itself. It's not like everyone in the program, every line can see the variable text. Okay, functions are one-way mirrors. Functions can see inside of themselves. It can see into the program, but a function cannot see inside of another function. Function divide has no idea what function add is doing. Function say this has no idea what function divide is doing. It has no idea what x and y are, what 9 and 3 are. It cannot see inside divide. Okay, and this is on purpose. It's not a flaw of JavaScript. This is on purpose, and this is on purpose to protect the code from you. It's to protect the code from the rest of your program and yourself. So what in order to happen is, in order to get divide, in order to have it mean something, we can write this line 67, say this, divide 9 and 3. There's nothing wrong with that statement. That is not a broken statement. It's just incomplete. Because in order for divide to work, we need to use the keyword return. And what return will do is it's going to give us a value. It's going to give us something that we can return back to the program. Okay? And so we can leave the console log statement there, or we can get rid of it. Doesn't really matter, because we can do return x divided by y. Okay. Same thing as we wrote in the console log, except we're going to put it right at the end of divide, here, return. And now, when we run it, 3. We no longer get an undefined statement, we get 3. And why is this working? Why is this happening? What does return do? Return is going to essentially give back the x and y values to the main program, to the main game, through the word divide. So essentially it makes divide, the function divide, equal to whatever value is returned. Okay? So meaning if I said, okay, say this, divide 9 by 3. We can console log that, but say I just say 1, right? Return 1. Say this should now is going to take in 2 parameters, divide. Okay, basically it's going to ignore the 9 and 3, and it's going to make divide equal to 1. Okay, we see it there. We can return anything we want. Okay, and it essentially makes divide equal to that. The parameters no longer matter because the parameters are just being used to console log it. The program doesn't know. It just says, all right, I'll console log x and y. And then return, oh, okay, you want me to return anything that happens after that word keyword return. It's going to now make divide, the function divide, equal to that. Okay, so we can access that value just by console logging it or setting it to a value, right? To show you another way of doing it, we can say const value equals divide. We have to pass in something. I'll do the same thing, 9 and 3. Okay. Okay, anything we want. Okay, divide 9 and 3, console log, it's going to be doing that. Let's see if I can do anything we want. Let's get rid of that real quick. Get rid of that. Figure hide these things, the function calls, so that we don't clean up this a little bit. Say this. Whoops. Oh boy. That's not good. All right. Say 2 things. Hide that too. Okay. Okay. So in this case, actually in here, I will hide that console log too. Okay, so now we have a value of nothing, right? So I'm going to uncomment, say this, divide 9 and 3. Okay. So now the only thing we have in log into the console is this statement right here, say this, divide 9 and 3. And the reason why it's logged into the console is when we look at divide. Why is it logged into the console? Say that. Oh, because I have say this. Oh, such a fool. All right, yeah, we have say this is console logging that text, right? I forgot. Duh, that's what say this does. Oh boy. All right, so function say this is console logging that text, right? And so we told it to basically give it this number, right? Return anything we want. And then I told you that we are making that value, we're making divide equal to this return statement. And I'll show you why this is. So const value, divide 9 and 3. So we run that function. We give it those parameters, which really don't matter, right? Because now we're not even doing anything with them, but the program doesn't know that, so we have to accept those in. And so now we see const value equals divide 9 and 3. So in this case, we now set value equal to whatever divide 9 and 3 is. And we can see by console logging value, all right, this could be just any variable, we are getting the exact same thing as we got up here. Okay, so returning a statement, returning a value is very, very helpful in making divide equal to something. And we're going to see this because if you're doing something like you want to create a little function that's going to handle movement, or it's going to handle addition or subtraction of points or scores or lives, you don't want to have to do that math over and over again. So in here, we could just do divide, okay? And we could do something like, what We'll do XY again. Now, if we click run, we see that showing you the reusability. Okay, we have two different things that call divide later on. We've just changed up the return statement on line 61 just one time, and it changed both of those statements later on to produce 3. All right, once again, if we wanted to change just one, we can see that's going to change what the value of this function is just to 1. So we'll keep it X and Y for now. Okay, so now we have the ability to create little mini programs that can run. There you go, you see it? Okay. The last thing is when we define functions, okay, I would say the most important thing to note is that because there's a lot going on here, right? What's the most important thing? Is dealing with scope, right? And dealing with the fact that functions are one-way mirrors and that nothing can see into a function, right? So if I tried to here console.log x, we defined x above, going to come back, x is not defined because the main program, even though we define it here, okay, we define it as what we would say a local variable to the divide function, meaning that nothing can see this variable inside of here. Okay, nothing's going to know it's there, so that's why we have to use the return statement to get that value back out again. Okay, to let the program know what that value is. Okay. Now, the other thing that I would note here is that just know that when you write a function, we just have to be sure we call it. With the exceptions of like functions create or preload or these ones that are built into Phaser, we don't really have to worry about creating. We don't really have to worry about calling those because those are already called for us. Every other function that we define ourselves, which is what we're doing here, is defining functions. Okay, is we have to call just like we did an add 2 3. If you don't call it, it won't run, and you're going to be confused as to why your program's not running. But that is going to be the reason why. And once you get used to doing this, I mean, I'm going to point it out to you as we go through it. But this is probably one of the most important fundamental building blocks of programming and game design is understanding, just simply recognizing functions, what they are, what they do, why they're there, and how we write it. Phaser has a slightly different way that we're going to be writing it. And to understand what that is, we have to just cover one more concept. And that's going to be creating game objects. And what game objects are, it's going to be a function that has inside of it a series of attributes and little mini functions inside of it. So functions within functions. And that's what's going to use to create most of the game. Once we understand that, basically there's nothing else that we need to really cover as fundamental. But I wanted to show you first, setting up our game, that we had these things called functions, preload, create, right? And that we need to understand how those work, what they are, and what we can do with them in order to make our game run. And so now that we know, we've covered everything we need to know about functions, returning functions, creating them, adding function parameters, you're in a pretty good spot to actually start diving in. And next lesson we'll do is we'll take a look at, like I said, these game objects, how they work, and how we can manipulate them.